welcome everyone. First of all, just a quick administrative announcement. This is more of a reminder. I think you've all seen the email on it. Basically, we find that typically we get started with the lecture series by about 5:15, and in past we've traditionally reserved an hour and a half. We'd like you to just think of the lecture series as really starting at 5:15 and going to 6:15. It won't always go all the way to 6:15. That includes Q&A and so forth. But just to reserve enough time for everything that happens, please be patient and wait till 6:15. And if you have a class that starts, if you have a 6:10 class and you have to go at 6, that's fine. We understand. And and we're happy to allow for exceptions and things like that. We really we didn't get a chance to properly communicate the timing the way this year started with the construction of the auditorium at the very beginning. But anyway, I just want to reinforce the announcement. Think of the lecture series as going to 6:15. Okay. All right. So with that. It's my pleasure to welcome John Battelle to tonight's A. Richard Newton Distinguished Innovator Lecture Series. Truly an amazing background. Double Berkeley graduate, that's in archaeology, and then the graduate degree in journalism. He's an entrepreneur, an innovator, and a journalist. Founded Wired magazine. He's a chairman of Federated Media, the largest advertising exchange that serves 1 billion impressions per day. He's co-founded major conferences that includes Conversational Marketing Summit, Web 2.0, and OpenCo, among others. In 2006, he authored the book, The Search, How Google and Its Rivals rewrote the rules of business and transformed our culture. Awards, he's got numerous awards that includes Global Leaders of Tomorrow and Young Global Leaders, both, I think those are both, but basically awarded by the World Economic Forum at Davos. And to top all of that, kind of as in, if that isn't enough, he also serves on his children's school board. So with all of these achievements, I'm really happy to introduce John Battelle.
Thank you. So we're totally going on the fly here. First of all, I went to Berkeley 83 to 87 the first time. Okay, now I was a prodigy. I went when I was 8. But the idea that I would see, I'm kidding, all of those Macs out there is just amazing. Because when I was in school, the Mac came out. And there was no way I could go to school with one on my lap. So it's pretty cool to see all those Macs. I'm kind of I'm a Macintosh guy. I am not an Apple guy. We'll get into that in the Q&A if you'd like. I'm in the process of writing a book that is about an age we're entering, an age lit with information. It's a very hard book to write, and it's taking me a long time, and I feel like we might be in a different age before I'm done. But this talk is a work in progress, as the book is. So, bear with me. So I'm going to start with a story about a story. My career, and I was asked to talk a little bit about it, and for me that's kind of odd, but it was interesting to reflect, because I've been working for 30 years on one story, as a journalist, as an entrepreneur, on one story, which is a story of how digital technology changes culture. And each time I get to a really interesting part of that story, I end up starting a company. I don't know why, other than it seems like no one's telling the story in a way that seems it should be told, and then starting a company seems the right way to get that story told. And narrative is an extremely powerful thing in the human, in the way we're wired. I just met with your dean, or the dean of engineering here, and his push to bring design into engineering, I think, is part of bringing narrative together with science. And I think it's super important. So my story is the story of a story. Started 3 decades ago when I came here. And I became obsessed with two things. Not those two computers, but computers and anthropology. And I had an IBM PC for the first year I was at Berkeley, and then I had a Mac, because that was '84 when the Mac came out. And I had a Mac for the rest of my time. And I read a lot of terrible anthropological tracts, and I read a couple of amazing ones. And this is one, Clifford Geertz, who was an cultural anthropologist who knew how to tell a story. And I just fell in love with this idea of telling the stories of how mankind, through his artifacts, changed and created culture. And to me, this was in my sophomore or junior year, there was no more amazing artifact in the history of the world than the Macintosh computer. I took a class from a guy named James Dietz, now deceased, here at Berkeley, who taught me that speech was an artifact, that writing was an artifact, that almost anything could be interpreted as an artifact. We'll get to why that word is so important to me. But as soon as I graduated, it turned out I had to get a job. I worked at Worcester making coffee, but it turned out that wasn't really a living wage once I got off my college scholarship. So I had to get a job. Now, I was obsessed, remember, with computers and anthropology. So, of course, the two job offers I had were research analyst for technology at Morgan Stanley, which I thought sounded dreadful and boring, but at least it was about something I cared about, technology. And the other was an unpaid internship at this magazine called MacWeek, which covered Apple. So guess which one I took? The unpaid internship. That's my byline. And let me just read this for you, okay, because this is going to get to the next slide. Supporting color, hypercard access, and a new Mac interface, Blythe Software Omnis 5 database program made its debut last week. Compelling shit. So I wrote stuff like this. I was on fire. You know how you are when, your age. You could just do stuff all the time, right? And I just covered I covered this stuff. I was so into databases and so into networks and so into user interfaces. And I thought they were going to change the world. But I wrote for this, which was read by 70,000 people in corporate IT departments. And my mom was proud I was a journalist, but didn't know what I was writing about. And I thought I needed to change that. So in order to change that, what did I do? Came back here to earn a degree, a master's degree in journalism. Because I figured if I had a piece of paper that proved that I could write a narrative story about something that didn't include hypercard and databases in the first opening sentence, then perhaps I could succeed in telling my story better. So I came here to learn how to tell the story. And while I was here, there's a master's thesis that you do at the end of your 2 years. And the goal is to go really in depth on one big story. And of course, my big story was the intersection of technology and culture. And I thought, there's no better way to tell that story than not just to write a story, because how do you say, hey, it's a big deal? That's silly. Create a company, make a magazine, create a publication. Now remember, this is back when people made magazines, okay? Paper magazines. This is 1992. So I thought, I wrote a thesis proposal, about a 2 or 3 page proposal, for what I called the Rolling Stone of the digital age. And my dean thought it was a crazy, stupid idea. And he said, you don't know how to start a magazine, you don't have any money, no one else in the school is interested in joining your crazy band of writing about this stuff. They all want to write about war and, interesting stuff, and you want to write about what? And I'm like, this is a revolution, it's a big deal. And he said no. So I wrote a very long 25-page story about how digital was changing the print industry, which is in the archives somewhere in Berkeley, unread. However, when I was doing the research for that story, it took me to New York, where I met my wife. So that's a good thing. We had our 20th anniversary just last week, now that I think about it. It's pretty cool, yeah. Anyway, that was a meander. So when I left Berkeley, after a little stint at the LA Times to make sure I really hated newspapers, I joined up with 5 other people and started this, Wired Magazine. And no one thought it was a good idea, except for a few very crazy people who gave us just enough money to get out the first issue. And once that first issue got out, that was when I had my first true taste of entrepreneurship. Now, MacWeek was a startup, and I was working in a startup in '87 in the Valley covering technology, but that was different. I was a partner, and this was working, and it was just going boom, which was super cool. I mean, we had more white mail, which is, those blow-in cards in magazines that fall in your lap? I don't know if the older people are going, yes, I know. So the equivalent of like disruptive banner ads. Anyways, we had like tens of thousands of those coming in after the first issue. It was amazing. We had a hit. And then we created all sorts of other crazy stuff. We created the first commercial website in 1993. Because we thought this web thing was going to be a big deal. And then the first banner ad on a website. This is a funny story. So this is the first banner ad. It says, have you ever clicked your mouse right here? You will. Except now you don't. But back then, everybody did. The click-through rate, on average, in the industry that I'm now a part of in my current company, is on average 0.07%. And you're engineers, you can figure that out. It ain't a lot. It was 75% on that ad. Why? Because no one had ever seen it, and it was like a big thing in the middle of the page saying, you should click here. Okay. It worked. It worked. So Hotwired was super cool. We sold it to a company during the rise of the dot-com bubble for a ton of shares in the company that went to 120. And I was so thankful that I had those shares that we sold at like 30 and got to 120 that I kept them on the other side. Damn. Anyway, I left Wired in 1997 because I had another story I wanted to tell that was part of this narrative. I was seeing these interesting companies just bursting onto the scene all over the place, startups in every imaginable stripe, trying to remake the physical world on the internet. Amazon and eBay and all those, but millions of ones that you've never heard of because they came and went probably while you were in like 8th grade. But I started a magazine to chronicle that. And it's a magazine that still holds the record for the most ad pages in the history of publishing. It was another rocket ship. It went from 0 to the biggest magazine in the fastest growing magazine in the history of publications in about 3 years, which seems like really slow now. But that was really fast for publication. Still holds the record for ad pages. It was doing 120 million in revenue with 21 million in real, honest to goodness profit. In the year 2000 with 3 different lines of business, an online site that was killing it, all sorts of cool stuff going on. Man, was everything great. Things got a little crazy. This is downtown San Francisco near Jackson Square. This is a billboard that I had put up on the side of a building because we had 9 offices in Jackson Square. It was impossible to get real estate because everyone was starting up another startup in 1999, 2000. And so we couldn't get all of our people, 400 of them, in one place. So I put a map on the side of a building because no one had apps where you could. So I literally put a map on the side of it. Here, this is where sales is. This is, so people could come and see, and this is the headquarters. Here's where the editorial is here, I mean, how stupid is that? I mean, I still can't believe I paid to do that. But those were the silly times. And then this happened. This is a chart, a stock chart of the NASDAQ composite. This is right when I put that billboard on the side of the building. This is 1 year later. We lost 75% of our revenue in 4 months. Yeah, you should be quiet. That was not fun. What happened is you've got $80 million of costs. And if you've got $120 million of revenue, that's pretty cool. You got variable costs in there of about 20, and then you got profit. But if all of a sudden you have 80 million of cost and you have 40 million of revenue, things get ugly fast. That's when we and a lot of other companies went bust, the dot-com crash. That was not fun, but it was really important that I went through it. And what happened afterwards? Came back here. Why? Well, as the dean of the dean of the Graduate School of Journalism at Berkeley, who thought that Wired was a spectacular idea, but he wasn't the dean when I was there, invited me to come back and teach. And I taught for 3 years. I took a chair that was funded by Mayor Bloomberg in New York. And I taught publication, business models, and editorial, and digital business models. It was a great place to hang out for a while I figured out what I was going to do next. And as I believed, this narrative that I was part of was not over. You may not recall, but in the year 2001, there was a lot of triumphant noise out of New York that this internet thing was over and now it was just a distribution channel. It was nothing big. It wasn't really going to change anything, thank God, because all these industries truly were getting worried about whether or not these little startups were going to disrupt their space. And it turned out that they didn't, not the first time. But the second time, they started to. So in 2003, I began to notice that these startups were happening again. But they were starting in a different place. They were building on top of the platform of the internet, and they were able to do things that the first version were not able to do. There was more bandwidth, there was more processing, there were more engineers, there was just a lot more resource to build the true promise of what the internet could be. This became known as Web 2.0, and the Web 2.0 era is sort of 2003 to 2010 or so, built on Ajax and LAMP stacks, and these things may even make sense to you, even though we've moved on to other programming languages. So I started a company called Web 2, and I did media and conferences around that, and I got to, throughout the last 10 years, interview all these cool people and grill them and ask them hard questions like that's Facebook and Microsoft and Twitter and Google. So Google's the interesting thing. So now it's 2003, 2004, and I've been thinking about a book for a couple of years, and I'm seeing this company just coming out of nowhere. And so I wrote a book about that company's story and what it meant for our culture. To have mankind's, humanity's knowledge at our fingertips, and to create an index of our intentions, and to be able to declare that intention, and in 0.6 or 0.06 seconds get a complete portal about that intention delivered to you. That's amazing. You guys take it for granted, but for someone who had search engines before Google, trust me, when you put in like cars and got porn sites, you're like... So Google was a revelation, and Google is still the company, I think, that has the greatest chance to become that one company that scares us as the villain in every single science fiction movie you've ever seen. Google is an extremely powerful and important company. I got very lucky to write the book about that company at the time it was going public, which was kind of cool. It's still in print, and it's in 27 languages, and I get emails from engineers in like Indonesia saying, thank you, I just read the book and started a company. I'm like, do I get shares? I mean... Anyway, I also noticed something else happening, mainly because of search, which was that there was a rise of a new kind of publishing enterprise on the internet. They didn't have to buy marketing because people found what they made because what they made was good and it got good inbound links. So they built natural communities of people. This was the blogging revolution. In 2005, I started a company called Federated Media that federated media. That's why I called it Federated Media. It brought lots of those smaller publishers together, made them look big, and then I talked to marketers and introduced them to these publishers, and we exchanged dollars between them. And I also brought in lots of platforms that were popping up during that time in the Web 2 era, and I integrated lots of cool publisher stuff on those platforms and created marketing stuff out of it. That's all I'm ever going to say to a room full of engineers. We did marketing stuff, okay? But I worked with Twitter and Dig and Foursquare and Facebook when they first started, which is kind of cool, you know? And then a lot of other publishing brands. Have you guys ever heard of Boing Boing? Yay. I helped start that company too. That's like one of my favorites. Anyways, so Federated, I started in 2005, and I thought, you know, this is going to be great. And it was. It grew and it grew and it grew, and in 2008 I took $50 million in funding. 50, that's a lot of dollars. That gets hard. Once you take that kind of money, you all of a sudden are very responsible. People expect things from you. But what I did instead, after 2 years, 2.5 years of taking that funding, and we grew and grew, and things were going great, and we were on a $100 million revenue run rate. I was going to have my second company that made it to $100 million. So what did I decide to do? Get off the boat very gingerly before it blew up. Because remember what happened last time? Yeah, I didn't want that to happen again. So I hired a CEO, and I became chairman, which means you sit in a chair. It's a rocking chair, but the idea was I was going to stroke my beard and I was going to think big thoughts and finally write that second book that I've been thinking about for 4 years, right? That I'm still thinking about today. Along the way, people ask me what this book is about. And I'm like, okay, well, here's the deal. Like, it's a Hollywood pitch, right? Okay, so it's like where I left off with the search, plus James Glick's The Information, which everyone bought but no one read, and then really good narrative journalism with a cultural anthropology focus. People are like, look forward to that. We'll see how that goes. The name is If Then. It's an archaeology of the future. It's a big idea. I'm going to get to it in a second, because if I can explain it to you, maybe I can write it. But before I get there, something else happened. In 2011, while I was stroking my chin on that rocking chair, it's not really my rocking chair, but figuratively, my company, which I was still a very active chairman of, we acquired, for a large sum of money, a ad tech business called Legit. This is where, all of a sudden, I had working with me real engineers with real EECS degrees and stuff, like real, not just people who learned how to script and code, but like real engineers and data scientists who had doctorates and stuff, like way smarter than me. They all live in Boulder, but we're hiring. If you like skiing, we have open positions in Boulder. And who wants this whole valley thing? It's such a drag, It's like, it's a rat race. Go out to Boulder, ride your mountain bike. Come on. Anyways, we acquired this company in Boulder, and the reason we did it is we had a thesis, which was that programmatic advertising was going to take over our marketplace. The way advertising's been sold forever is by human beings calling other human beings and begging them to give them money. The way advertising works increasingly now is that it is a liquid marketplace that's traded programmatically based on algorithms written by people, but in real time, much as the stock market works, with one important difference. The stock market is based on arbitrage and closed systems where no one really knows what's going on, and usually the greatest fool suffers. The ad tech ecosystem, most of that's also true right now, but it's open. Anyone can join and try and build a better system, and if they win, they take over. And it's exciting. This is the most famous map of the ad tech ecosystem. Have any of you seen it? Wow, I will tell Terry that a lot of people here saw. This is the Lumascape. It's done by a colleague and friend of mine, Terry Kawaja, who is the founding partner of Luma Partners. He's an investment banker. He cares about ad tech a lot because he sat around with a microscope and put every single logo he thought that mattered on this chart. Who understands this chart? Anyone? Okay. I don't either. And I have 2 companies on it. Okay? So this didn't make a lot of sense to me. But what I did understand was over here there were marketers who had stuff to sell, and over here there were publishers, that's the way I've been doing most of my career, who had the attention of valuable audiences who might buy the stuff that the marketers want to sell. Why is there all this stuff in the middle? Because there's a lot of money at stake. Trillion or more dollars at global ad spend at stake. Everyone's running hard after that. The whole economy is interested in this proposition. This is the most viewed slide ever in business, I think. But I don't think it makes sense. So of course, because I had nothing else to do and I was on my rocking chair and I was procrastinating from doing my actual job of writing the book, I created a visualization of that ad tech ecosystem, which I am now going to attempt to narrate for you. Oh, snap. Refresh. Is there a way to make this show on the other screen? Oh, I know what I can do. I will mirror the windows. I'm a Mac guy. And arrangement, mirror displays, and voila. Yeah. Okay. So imagine this little square here. Each of the little dots and the squares inside the square are pieces of data about a human being that's inscribed on a cookie or another unique identifier. Okay? In this case, a 32-year-old working mother living in the Midwest, browsing Etsy and Wikipedia, just read a New York Times article, right now reading a New York Times article, and recently went on eBay. Okay? Just some information. There's actually thousands of parameters beyond that, but just for simplicity's sake, let's play the visualization. Okay. Now I am going to try to, please play. This experience is designed for Firefox and Chrome. Yes. Thank you. I know that. I designed it. Okay. So this is the web page. In this case, it's on a tablet, and it creates an impression request that goes out to the publisher. The publisher server takes a look at it, examines it, and says, well, do I have my own direct sold? My people have sold, and if not, if it doesn't have direct sold, it says, no, I'm going to put it out into the liquid biddable market of the ad exchange. So it sends it out to an ad exchange. We have one at Federated. And it sends it out to that ad exchange, and that ad exchange examines it, and a whole universe of bidders look at that, and they do an instant real-time auction on that, saying, well, given this is a woman who's 32 years old, do I want this impression, do I not want this impression? The number of milliseconds, by the way, is going down along there. This is in terms of how long it takes for all this to happen. The auction takes place. It's usually a second price auction, so you can't game the first price. The winner gets a smiley emoticon there. Then there's all this stuff that happens after the auction where they fulfill the ad in real time, sometimes building an ad based on the data that's understood about the user. And that creative and content is sent out to the web page, and it is put into the ad. Just the way Google results instantly reorder around you, now the ads and content reorder around you as well. And this is done hundreds of thousands of times a second across millions of websites, creating billions of impressions a minute. In our small little corner of the world at Federated Media, we do about 35 to 40 billion of these a month. We look at 3 billion a day, but we serve about 1.5. So that's the, you can look at it again. It's called Behind the Banner. Google it. It comes up first. It's all good. And we'll see if this goes back to, it doesn't seem to want to go back to PowerPoint. Is it up there now? Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. We're back. Yay. Now, remember how there was this thing sort of when I was in the 80s, I was at a startup, but I didn't really know I was at a startup. And then in the early 90s was my first startup. And then the late 90s was the bubble. And then the early 2000s was Web 2.0. Right now, something new's happening again. Startups are changing again. Web 2.0 and the startups of the bubble weren't all driven by missions. They weren't all driven by trying to change the world, and they were mostly tech and internet startups. What I've noticed now is that startups are mission-driven, they want to make a dent in the universe, and they're across almost every industry. It's not just internet and tech anymore. But they all have a foundation of tech and internet in some way. It's gone horizontal. And so I started a company last year, because again, I was procrastinating on my book, to tell the story of those companies. And instead of starting a magazine or a conference where you get 1,000 people in a room and people talk at people, I thought it'd be interesting to flip the model. So what we do is, we've noticed that these companies cluster in cities or urban centers like the Bay Area or Seattle or London or Detroit. Find those companies, curate those companies, and then we do an open house. So those companies open their doors over the course of a day or two, and we have a festival, and people like, okay, have you ever gone to music festivals, multi-stage, couple-day, 3-day music festivals? You have these apps where you pick your bands, and you go from stage to stage and pick your bands and see this, then that, then this, then that. So instead of bands, we have companies. Instead of stages, we have neighborhoods in cities. It's really cool. It's called OpenCo, and the companies open their doors, and you can go check them out. We did it 2 weeks ago. And over 2 days, you could see 10 to 12 companies where you actually go in and hear the founders in their native environment talk about starting the company or talk about their mission, what they're doing, who they're partnering with. These companies all have a philosophy of connectivity, of being open to collaboration, of even having partnerships with competitors. And it's something important is happening with startups now. They're actually trying to do good. whereas in the bubble, it was just trying to make money. And I want to support that. So for me, making a company in that space is the only thing I know how to do. So I did it. Meanwhile, all this was getting so interesting that I decided to go back to Federated as CEO this year. Because as founder, with that big 50 million number on it, I felt like it was my responsibility to make sure it was properly projected to the right place. And it had so much opportunity that I wanted to make sure it was going right. And maybe I was trying to get away from the damn book. But I went back this year, and I swear I'm going to write the book. My board knows that I'm going to spend time writing the book. And having the chance to talk to you guys means I can talk about the book. So that's what I'm going to do for a few minutes. We are becoming data. So we have to get good at it. Right now, all of you are streaming data off of your laps and your phones. And it's just interesting to see it physically before me, data coming off. I'm at John Battelle if you're tweeting. We better get good at it because we're really good at imagining what happens if we're not good at it. This is from The Matrix, if I'm already dating myself, but data. We are now entering an era that I think is very similar to this historical era between World War I and World War II, when the entire modern world was electrified, and electrical engineering became the coin of the realm. And this era, which is, well, if you've got nothing better to do, read a book. This book is a good sort of history of that era. We are just now turning on the light switch of the data-lit era. Just as during the mid-war between World War I and II, we did the same with electricity. We made the switch live. Now, instead of filling rooms only with light, we are filling rooms with data. And it's not just rooms, it's every physical object that has any value to us is becoming described by data and being made transactable. That's really a big, head-hurting kind of thing. So, we're building on the shoulders of what we built before, this massive terraforming we did of the Earth to get electrical lines around, this, lionization of greats like Tesla and Edison, who, now it's Zuckerberg and Page, right? And we are literally lighting the world up with data. This is that famous Facebook social graph map of connections between people around the world. So here's a bit of background, and this is the only thing that I'm going to get into that feels even the slightest bit academic, because it has numbers and graphs. But as you will see, I will break every rule of it, and because I'm in front of all of you guys, you're going to totally call me out. Because I didn't get around to breaking the little XY graph when I mess it up in the next slide. So anyways, let's start. This is time. This is the number of individuals involved. This is the size of the industry. The industry is, in history, known as the IT industry. Okay? So the first wave of innovation in the IT industry touched very few people, happened a long time ago, probably before most of you were born. But when my father used to come home with punch cards in his briefcase, and I'd say, "What are those, Dad?" And he said, "Frickin' Fortran," Cobalt, like a curse word, Cobalt, which is a mainframe programming language. And I said, "I'm never getting into that, man." That sounds awful. Anyways, what happened? Enterprises automated the back office, accounting, inventory, payroll, tough stuff. Got automated, turned into digital data on tape rolls and punch cards and stuff, right? Not a very big industry, but pretty big. Not that many involved, and most of them wore lab coats and tended to room-sized computers, right? There was not much of a user interface between all of that data and normal human beings. The interface, as a matter of fact, is so non-existent and old that I couldn't find a picture of it on Google. So I'm using its descendant. Here's the interface. The C prompt, also known as the Unix prompt, which is its kind of, C is the DOS is sort of related. But you remember what happened when you put in, did you ever use C prompt? Okay, again, well, you're not that old, come on. So DOS is interesting because you have to speak a completely weird language that makes no sense, right? Der, bat, x, e, yeah. Right, I learned it enough to get around the PC and write, because that's all I wanted to do was write. I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't, unfortunately, want to program it. So what happened in the next wave is all of a sudden we started talking between the front offices and the back offices of enterprises, and everyone became information workers, and everyone got a computer on their desk, and that computer was connected to the back end, and all of a sudden you could pull data from the back end computers about your business, and you had LANs and WANs, and you had to have a different interface for all of that, because normal office workers who didn't have computer science degrees would not be able to manage in DOS. And there's no way you could scale the number of people involved without a new user interface, right? And this was when, of course, the PC became the man of the year in Time magazine in the 80s. And it needed a new interface. This is about the time I was at Cal. And of course, I think the Macintosh was the winning interface. And by the informal poll of what I'm seeing out there, I was right. But Windows really did win that particular phase of the war. So now we are all merrily working in the information economy, talking between the back office and the front office, and sharing reports over our LANs and WANs with each other. But I think we know what the next big wave is. All of a sudden, everybody came online, right, through the internet, and companies had to talk to their customers. So now the connections are made between all of enterprise and business and consumers don't really want to hunt and poke their way through the reams of information that all of a sudden was coming online. The hunt and poke interface is the equivalent of going to a foreign country and going, you know what I mean, but that's about as much as you're going to get out of it if you don't speak the language, right? So you can't hunt and poke your way through the internet. You need a new interface to deal with all of that information, and that interface was Google. Natural language query. That's not how most people, probably you guys, but how most people don't think about Google as a natural language query interface, but that's what it is. You're putting actual words into Google. Now it's actually words. I mean, Google's voice search so kicks Siri's butt. It's not even funny. Why? Because they have so much data, but that's a whole nother topic. Anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Google was the interface for the Web 2.0 era. Okay? Search was the interface. But we're getting to a point where we're now moving into a new era. And no one really knows what the interface is going to be, although there was a moment when everyone was sure it was going to be Apple because of the iPhone. Right? I think that was transitory. I don't think we're there yet, and a lot of companies, that one in particular, would like to think that they're the interface to the next thing, but I don't think it's social either. And Google, of course, is certain they've got it figured out. They just haven't let you know what it is yet. And then these guys are going public in a day and a half, and they'll have a couple $2 billion to figure out the problem as well. So this is an interesting time because we are now about to break some rules of math. Notice the things in red. We've got new scales. Participants in the billions, industry sizes in the billions. Now we're getting to, you must be thinking to yourself, there aren't 1,000 billion human beings on the planet. No, there are not. That's the entire world GDP. Yes, it is. So here we are. I'm supposed to break that axis to show you that I'm going off the thing, but I didn't. I couldn't. PowerPoint. So here's Google. Here's, just for reference, back to where we were. Now, this is what changes. Everything of value is addressable. Everything that matters has an IP address, is covered in data, and can transact and discuss philosophy, if it wishes to, with everything else. Right? Right now there are 9 billion, now 10 billion things connected to the internet. Things, not people, things. There's only 2.4 billion people connected. Cisco estimates that that 10 billion is 1% of the number of things that are going to be connected to the internet in 20 years. 1%. So that's 1 trillion things. That's a lot of things. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of opportunity. That's a new mass user interface we have to figure out. And I think we're in the middle of figuring it out. It's your guys' job. I'm old. I got a rocking chair. Your job. I maybe will tell your story, but you guys help figure out, will you? Because we don't have it quite figured out yet. So the thing that I want to do in my book is not try to declare what that interface is going to be, because I'll just be wrong and I'll look stupid. So I'm going to use the tools of archaeology I learned here at Berkeley a long time ago. This is where I talk about the book. I have this idea of antiquities of the future. And this is what objects are extant, exist right now in today's culture that 30 years from now will be the archaeological artifacts we'll look back and say, those really mattered. 1 billion or more people started using that in the past 30 years, and it changed our world, right? That's the premise of the book. Find those objects, tell their stories, right? So it's interesting to actually do that 30 years ago when I started, 1983, literally 30 years ago when I came to Cal. That's terrifying. We still haven't won a Rose Bowl. That's what my dad says, too. He went to Cal in the 50s. I know. My grandfather went to Cal in the 20s, but we went to the Rose Bowl then. Anyway, where was I? Oh, how about this? 20 years ago, this guy came out. Okay, pretty important artifact. 20 years ago, this came out. Pretty important artifact. 30 years ago, I should say. 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, hundreds of thousands of people flocked to internet services. Hundreds of thousands. Like, huge. And the guys who used this look like that. What a tool. But I mean, you know, do you remember the really with the brick and every movie made in the 80s had that guy being the idiot, right? The guy on the big phone, right? Now it's the guy running into you. But in any case, I started looking for the objects that I thought 1 billion people would use in the next 30 years, and they're everywhere. So figuring out which ones are most important, email me and help me, because I'm still working through this. Body sensor media, turning our bodies into data. Once we have 1 billion people who have that information being driven up into a cloud, and it includes blood chemistry, and it includes skin conductivity, and it includes heart rate, and it includes physical activity, and what you ate, and all of that. 1 billion people with that information, intelligent spiders going over them, and sending you a real-time message when you're about to eat that cheeseburger going, I'm not sure, probably not a good idea based on what I know, right? That's going to change the agricultural policy of nations. It's going to change the energy policy of nation. It's going to change the insurance industries. It's going to change how you work, because you'll probably have to have one of these things if you want to get health insurance at the place you work. Just interesting. This is a driverless car. You guys have some of this work you're doing. I know your dean works on Path. I've driven in one of these. It's uncanny. It's cool. But it changes the entire notion of agency. All of America was about getting in the car, driving down the road, and if you screw up in one town, just get in the car and hop till you get to the next town and start your life over again. Well, an autonomous car is going to know where you went. There's just all sorts of things. And all of a sudden, how are you going to customize an autonomous car? Well, if you're a Japanese teenager, do you want a Hello Kitty skin on your car? Or how do you... Interesting stuff. Let's just put it this way. Cars terraformed cities. 40 to 60% of most urban cities are parking spaces for cars. What happens when cars are smart, autonomous, and don't need to park because they're always moving around carrying people everywhere? And it's all driven by this incredible amount of data. If you want to see the matrix, look at an open laptop and a Google driverless car. It is mind-blowing. Drones. You think about the drones. I mean, besides the military uses, there's this one, Chris Anderson, who does a drone company. There's an app he has for his drone, which is Follow Me. And just you walk around and it follows you from behind with a camera on you. It's like the ultimate narcissist app. You can just see your bald spot if you have one, but if you don't have one, you're even feeling better about yourself. But it literally follows you around and takes a picture of you. You can live stream it to, I don't know, Snapchat. That's probably better than other places. This is a 3D printer. I know you guys all work with this stuff or probably want to or haven't already thrown it out because it's too clunky. But these things are going to change the nature of everything in terms of supply chains of large companies. Walmart, for example. Walmart, probably 40% of the stuff in Walmart in the next 10 years can be made on a 3D printer. So if you're Walmart, you are thinking about that a lot. If you're a shipping company, you're thinking about that a lot because who needs to ship plastic stuff between continents if you can just make it? This is Google Glass, which allows us to put digital data over physical objects, completing the loop of understanding the intersection of physical and digital. This is Bitcoin. I thought I was going to have a hard time writing about Bitcoin until that guy in San Francisco basically gave me my lead character, the Dread pirate Roberts. Thank you to him for making people think, wait a minute, Bitcoin's important. Did you see the cover of Time magazine? I mean, they never stop doing dumb things about the internet, do they? It's like, oh my God, porn and child, and threats and drugs and it's all over. I love Time magazine for that. This is a microfluidic chip. How many of you are working on that? Just 1, 2, 3. Can we meet afterwards and you tell me what it does? No, I'm kidding. I've spent a fair amount of time, not enough, thinking about this. But to me, this is one of the most important artifacts we have because this is truly where the physical meets the digital. It's a really important artifact that very few people are working with now, but a lot of lives are going to be affected, I think, in the next 30 years. But that last age, the electrical age, had a seminal artifact, the light bulb, right? So I got to find one, right? For the book, I got to find a seminal artifact. Help me find I've got an idea. And it is the banner ad. How many people hate banner ads? Come on, you can be honest. It doesn't matter that I do like 2.5 billion of them a day, but I don't like them that much either, and I'm responsible for that. Like literally, this idea came from a meeting we had at Wired in 1993 when we had hired 40 staff members for Hotwired and had no idea how we were going to pay them. And so we had an editorial meeting, which is, of course, where all the business ideas really should come from. And we had an editorial meeting, and they're like, how are we going to pay all these staffers? And I had this thing called Prodigy at the time, which was an online service, and it had this really irritating thing at the bottom that blinked at you, and it was an ad. And you couldn't get rid of it because back then, applications took over your whole screen on your PC, kind of like they do now on these lame little 4-inch glass phones we have, which I hope are only a phase. But anyways, you couldn't get rid of it, right? And so I thought, why don't we do that? Put a banner on, and Lewis, our CEO and editor-in-chief, said, even better, we'll put it at the top of the page so people can scroll it out of the way. The banner was born. I swear that's a true story. So why do I think that the banner is possibly the hero? I don't think it's a hero because it's such an obvious winner, like the light bulb. I think it's a hero because it is the unit of atomic value that drove us to build that. And that is going to be the infrastructure that allows us to transact all that information that I talked about before. Because it's not about ads. It's not even about ads, right? It's an open ecosystem allowing for exchange of value with unlimited data points in real time that will eat every part of our economy. When you turn up your thermostat, you will engage real-time ad tech. Not about getting ads, but about getting information so that that thermostat knows exactly what to do when you give it intent. Or when you go to a doctor's office, the information from all those devices will help create a better diagnosis. Or that's the Gap. When you walk into the Gap, and if you have glass or if you have a phone, all of a sudden offers come from all the competitors down the street saying, don't go in there. Come down to us, and we'll give you 15% off. We know that your daughter really wants this blouse. She came in yesterday, and she put it on hold, right? So the ability to do all this massive transacting is being built by the infrastructure that right now is doing one thing, creating lowly banner ads at the rate of something like 10 to 15 billion an hour. We're just practicing with marketing to create a liquid economy based on data. And I think that artifact is the one that people haven't quite seen yet, and I think it's a really important one. There's a lot to build on that. We're going to be living in a very different time. You're right at the cusp of it. It's so cool you're doing what you're doing. You have to exercise those muscles. You guys are the athletes. You get to do this. It's exciting to think about. So I'm going to stop for a second, because it's the last slide, and say I was asked to give a few life lessons from all the stuff that I've been through, and this is the first time I've gone through my career. It's kind of cool. Thank you for the opportunity. When you're building something, whether it's one project or a whole company, know you're right. Be totally 100% certain all the time that you're right until someone convinces you that you're not. And then say, God, I was totally wrong, and move on. Because most people who start things or run projects think they're totally right, and then they run into a wall. So that ability to know how to stop saying you're right and pivot is really important. This next one is so important to me. Don't make something you don't want to do yourself, use yourself, right? Don't make something for someone else. If you're really into something, make it for yourself. It'll work out. Be driven by a mission, not a milestone. This is, to me, the difference between a mercenary and a missionary. Mercenaries do things for money, and missionaries do it for love. If you're driven by a mission, you'll always be happy, even if you fail. If you chase getting money into your company or project and you succeed, it will then chase you around. Know that. I've raised almost $100 million in my career. This is a hard one advice. Raise money when you don't need to if you're going to be in a business where you raise money, because if you raise money when you need to, the people giving it to you know that. So it's best to raise money when you really don't need it. You're not alone. Everybody who does something, whether it's one small project, like when I wrote my thesis paper and got rejected, or my company, thinks they're alone when they have failures. You're not. There are so many people that want to help you if you reach out to them. But learn when to quit. Know when the ride's over. Something I learned from the industry standard. And the last one, I used a little leet so I didn't have to swear in the PowerPoint, even though I tend to swear a lot. But this I say, be nice. Life is really long. I'm in year 30, right? And I'm not planning on stopping. And it's really important that the people I've worked with, thousands and thousands, I've hired thousands of people. I've fired probably 1,000 people. And I hope to continue to work with thousands of people. What people say about you after they leave working with you really matters over the long run. So, life is long, remember that. It's hard to know that when you're starting out. So I hope we have time for questions, but thank you very much for this opportunity. So, other questions? Here's one.
I actually read the Anthropology book for the class. When I read it, I wasn't I liked it, but I wasn't in love with it. What did you like so much about interpretation of cultures?
About anthropology? What I liked about anthropology was that, it probably comes from, everything has for me, I'm very narrative driven, I'm very story driven. And what I liked about anthropology was that it was an attempt to understand the story of a culture. Why did this culture exhibit the way it did, right? And for me, that's journalism, just sort of slowed down. And I've just always been fascinated by stories, and particularly stories of culture and what they made. And anthropology struck me as a kind of rigorous way to get into that story. And some of it I think came from the fact that I'm adopted, and so I didn't really understand the culture I was in. It didn't fit, and so I've been looking for what that story might be, and that sort of drives me. So I was always drawn to that. But look, I've read an engineering book, and I thought it was pretty good, but I didn't really. So I was like, it's like whatever works. But for me, anthropology was really a backdoor into journalism and telling stories of things that I found fascinating. And what I ended up finding fascinating was technology. The others? Over here?
So you seem to be, so you're really excited about like the future of technology, having everyone share information, but what would you have any thoughts on the, any barriers against that, such as like issues with security and privacy and
Yeah.
misuse of information, such as I think like last week, like Adobe got hacked and like a lot of information.
Yeah, Adobe
leaked.
seems
How
to
would
be
you,
regularly
like-
hacked.
Yeah, but like how can you like
Yeah.
protect these barriers?
So every time there's a major shift in our society's social contract, and these happen with regularity, we have to renegotiate that contract as a society. When we moved into cities over an agrarian lifestyle, we renegotiated what it meant to be near each other and what privacy was. The concept of privacy really didn't exist until the Victorian era kind of declared it as such. It was a philosophical construct more than it was a reality. But once you were in a tenement or an apartment building living literally 2 inches from another human being who you did not know was not part of your clan or your tribe or your village, you had to renegotiate your contract about what it meant to be. Is it okay to yell at your spouse if there's someone in the next room who you don't know? I mean, this kind of renegotiation of privacy and security have happened before. What's interesting is that we now have the ability to be entirely lit with data such that all is knowable, and that terrifies us because we don't know that much about ourselves. So how are we supposed to protect and negotiate that about, in relation to entities we have no understanding of? At least the neighbor next door, you saw him in the hallway and you wondered whether he was a good guy or a bad guy, but he didn't seem like a bad guy on his face. We don't know who's looking at our data, and we don't understand who might have access to it. We're having a grand conversation about this right now, thanks to the generosity of the NSA, who has, and Edward Snowden, who I think is an absolute 100% patriot, and the way he's being treated by the US government is predictable but ridiculous. What he's done is given us the chance to really accelerate this conversation. So the ability to instrument ourselves as data, I equate to the ability to put on clothing. We are in our naked phase, and we are figuring out how to clothe ourselves in data and how to instrument that. Every day, we wake up and we spend some period of time thinking about what we're dressed like. When you're in the working world, you spend a little more time. When I came here, I shaved the first time in a few days. And, I put on a sport coat. I was meeting the dean. I wanted to look like, I cared. And I do actually care. I made sure my shoes weren't totally scuffed. I thought about it. Your data wardrobe, now everyone below the age of 30 is spending an awful lot of time playing with, negotiating what is our digital clothing. And I would predict that within 30 years it's going to be utterly natural and without thinking that we will instrument ourselves as data. I'm on the board of a company called Axiom, which is one of the largest data brokers in the world. And they just started a site called aboutthedata.org, which I suggest you check out. It has all the marketing data that they think they know about you, which you can go in and edit, which is revolutionary from my point of view, from aboutthedata.org, from Axiom, A-C-X-I-O-M. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, but it's a very important tip. So I think we are in the midst of renegotiating this. And there will be lots and lots of screw-ups as we figure this out. There is no perfect prophylactic for this because it's essentially saying that you don't want to engage in society if you just want to turn off all that data streaming around you and from you and bouncing off of you. Any others in the back?
Why Macintosh and not Apple?
Back in the day, the Macintosh was a upstart. It was a David to Goliath. When I covered the Macintosh in the 80s and 90s, it was always losing to the PC. And therefore, it had an upstart point of view. And it took a point of view that was more open, more inclusive, better for developers. Crazy smart people would make interesting stuff because the platform just had a more elegant, open, less cluttered approach to computing. Fast forward 20 years with the iPhone, I think what Apple's become is a closed vertical stack of technology that has extremely narrow and limited data policies and developer policies such that you cannot create innovative solutions outside of that stack. And I think that is not a winning strategy long term. I think a winning strategy looks more like Android, although I think Google's doing some things there that are not commendable too. But at least it's more open. Just as one example, here's an app idea. Any of you want to work on this with me, send me an email. Your phone is now the center of your life. Imagine an interface for your phone where you held it up and said, show me the last 30. The last 30 things that you did on your phone, the last 30 minutes of activity on your phone, all your tweets, all your Instagrams, everything you did, all your text messages, all your emails, anything. In a nice interface, in a sort of activity stream, and if you touched it, you went to that so you could interact on it or share it or send it. But it sort of was a meta interface to make sense of this craziness that is now our phones as they explode data out of them. It tries to reel it back in and make it usable in a human factor design way. This is an idea I have called Last When. So, and I get woken up by these every so often, and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. Apple doesn't let you take text messages and wrap them in something else because they want to control that point. If they had their druthers, they would have done it with photos before Instagram happened. That pissed them off, trust me. I don't like that approach. It stops innovation. So I think that's why I'm a Mac fan, because on the Mac, I could create a web browser that was an application that I could move around and do other things. But on the iOS, on Apple, it takes over the whole screen, and it has to be in Apple's terms of service, and it lives or dies by Apple's fiat. And I don't think that's appropriate in the long term. I don't think it's the way we want to live in the world, and I don't want to live in Apple's world. But I like the Mac. Any others? Or over here?
What's your take on native advertising?
Native ads. An interesting company came out of Berkeley a year ago in native advertising. Well, boy, this strikes a personal thing for me because Federated Media created a native advertising solution in 2006. I have got to get better at timing. But I think native advertising is fundamentally, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's advertising that speaks in the tone and context of the experience that you're currently having. The first great example of native advertising at scale, programmatic, is search ads, our search ads. So the ads that come up when you search, and they look just like the results, and they're contextually relevant. Sometimes if you're doing a navigational search, like Bill's used car lot, and if Bill has bought an ad, and it comes up as the first result, even though it's paid, sponsored advertising, it's useful, and you hit that link because it takes you to where you want to go. That's native advertising. Now native advertising is every publication in the world coming up with some way for an ad marketer to create native advertising that feels like the editorial of the publication. Twitter, going public Thursday morning, has a native advertising solution, which is tweets as ads. Instagram has it. Everybody's doing it. We have Federated, the native conversational suite, which takes over blogs and does posts in the... I think it's extremely important, but it's super fractured, and right now only the super platforms have scale at it. Facebook, Google, Twitter. Yahoo bought Tumblr because of native ads, among other things. They also have the young kids, and Yahoo's kind of like, skews a bit older. But whether they'll be successful is kind of one of the, like Marissa's great question in her company. So native, it turns on that, right? And they want to bring that programmatic, as does everybody. So yeah, I think it's super important. Because I think marketers have the right to have a voice in the conversation of publishing. They always have. I think the best example I've ever made of native advertising is Wired magazine. Because every ad in there kind of felt like Wired. Like those advertisers that went into that magazine, they made ads that were wired because they wanted to speak to that audience. So it's not a new concept, it's an old concept. We're just figuring it out in the digital space. Yeah, there's one more, and then I think we're like a minute past.
What do you think are the skills that we need as engineers to approach in a better way the new era?
Skills as an engineer for this era. The ability to collaborate, the ability to know your own limits, and the ability to communicate what you're good at to people like me. Really, I think that's super important because many, many non-technical founders like me are, will go, we just need an engineer. But everyone's not only an individual, but they have specific sets of skills that we don't understand how to map those skills to the idea we might have. And you don't understand how to map our ideas to your skill set or your ideas to our skill sets. We might be good at sales or marketing or product. You're good at building, but is it a match? We have to have a conversation about that. And I've found many times I've talked to engineers, it's hard to have that conversation. Engineer founders learn later how to have that conversation. Like Mark Zuckerberg is a very good example of that. And they make a lot of messes along the way. I think you can get out of your own way by learning those communication skills. I'm actually taking coding lessons now. I'm like an old dog. But because I want to understand at least the vocabulary of who I'm trying to work with, because I found it's been a real limitation for me personally.
All
All right, that's it, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much.